and get this meeting started with a roll call vote. You have I am here, Miss Allen, Mr. Kitson.
Yep, here.
Miss Shippert.
Present on Zoom.
Mr. Bally, Mr. Wilson. Appointed to the committee to have a quorum is Mr. Olson.
Here.
And Mr. Hudson. Present. Any changes or corrections from the previous minutes from the previous meeting? Hearing none, they'll stand as read. So the purpose of today's meeting is to revisit solar and wind. We are not going to discuss pipeline past what I just said about pipelines. So that's already at planning. Came back from planning, so that's where we're at. So we'll dive right in and let's go ahead and get started with the wind conversion system. So I open it up to. Yeah, your name again.
I'll introduce myself again. It's fine.
That'd be great. Let's start.
Yeah,
Go
good
ahead.
Morning. Arthur Roden. I'm a development director with NL Green Power. On behalf of the Bison Meadows Wind Project, I'd like to thank the members of the Lee County Renewable Energy Committee for hearing us today on your proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance. I will say that in light of recent developments in Congress, I think that we stand at the forefront of what will potentially be a historic shift in the way that the world is powered. And it's our intention to ensure that a portion of that transition finds a home here in Lee County. So I had tendered a letter, I think via Alice this morning. I don't know if you guys probably had time to review that, likely not. But I can talk through a few of the primary issues that we saw within the ordinance. First off being that we saw that there were a lot of items that are typically addressed either via the state or federal permitting authorities, where
Excuse me,
I just need some clarification.
real quick. I have this letter here. I did not have a chance to see it this morning. Do you guys want me to print it so you can follow along?
Let's print it so we can look at it.
Okay. Be right back.
Give us
Because I'm looking for it.
2 minutes.
Sounds good.
We are not gonna find it this best, apparently.
Could it be emailed to me so I can view it also?
Yes, I'll step out and have her shoot it over.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Do it.
Just so you know, this proposed project.
Thank you.
Yes. Hey,
Give me that.
gentlemen, hey, this proposed project runs through here.
Oh, the printer needs paper, couldn't find it. One of them days, isn't it? Yes. River still exposed to this morning? I was when I left, but I don't think it is now. I left early. This was one of the buildings, but I thought I'd get the alarm would go off or something. Nothing happened. Get your rear view to go? Yep.
Nothing matters right
Yeah,
now.
yeah. I gotta run it backwards now.
No, that's a report, isn't it?
Oh, 9 inches, let me check.
Let's see.
That's better. Thank you.
But, what number again? Oh, sorry. Nope. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, so I guess the first point I'd like to talk through would be really the idea of conceptual design versus what is going to be required for final submission in building permits. Typically, when we come with an application for a special use permit, we have a fairly refined design in hand. But as I'm sure you can understand, sometimes there needs to be deviations from the plan. And so we would like the flexibility to shift things within the project, as long as they remain compliant with the balance of the rules, whether it's moving a turbine a couple hundred feet, something like that, allowing for the flexibility to develop the project, yet not have to come back and go through the entire special use permit process again. At the end of the day, when we go to building permit, like those building permits will have to be compliant with the ordinance and all applicable federal and state regulations. And so it's just allowing the flexibility from the time of special use permit. If a turbine moves, a road moves, that doesn't necessitate coming back before the county for another special use permit hearing process. So if you guys had some questions on that or concerns.
Well, I do. I guess he is right. They do have to move them during the project. I've been involved in that. What are we at now, Alice? Or what does our verbiage say? He has to come back. The company has to come back then, or?
I believe there is a requirement that if things change, that they would have to come back. I would have to pull up the specific language. The concern would be is that at hearing, we're presented information, we're presented shadow flicker reports, noise studies, wildlife reports. And when you start moving things around, that may affect the results of the reports. So our concern would be that if it's different than what our ZBA and county board has already approved, then I think that it would require some form of coming back to make sure that it's still compliant with what the county wants.
Sometimes it's not a perfect world out there though. And the turbine is, I had to move a pivot because the turbine went in the wrong spot. So, that cost, me $50,000 to move the turbine, plus I can't water the area that it was at. Things do come up. Is there some kind of verbiage we put that they don't change the scope, size, or shadow flicker or something? Is there something we could put together?
I'm looking right now, trying to find the,
I mean, regardless if a turbine did move, we'd still have to adhere to, I think, the proposed 30-hour shadow flicker rule. Like we would still be compliant with the substance of the ordinance. And Sarah, I don't know if you mind talking about the environmental aspects of, if we pulled a road or a turbine into, jurisdictional wetland area, like it's just,
Yeah.
What number are you?
oh, here, no, it's fine.
Hi, my name is Sarah Polachek. I'm the environmental and permitting specialist at Enel Green Power for the Bison Meadows project. If at any point a turbine moves, we do adhere to all environmental assessments that have already been done. So if it is outside of that scope, then we will update those studies and we will present the findings to make sure that it is compliant and there are no adverse impacts to wildlife or wetlands.
Alice, what I'm kind of thinking is, I know we've got something in the solar that it says if the materials change, but still confines to the scope, like, could we do something along the same lines into, they still have to report it to the zoning office. And really it comes to the zoning office to
Well, I think the zoning office should sign off on it.
correct. But without having to go through, as long as the zoning office says, oh yeah, it stays in the
So
structure of what we're doing.
like for like changes are not an issue. And what we actually did recently with GSG, because we do understand that things may move, that if they did, that they were required to provide updated reports at the time of building permit. So that was a condition.
We talked to Chastain maybe and get some, or would you rather put a condition? I don't like the condition because then they're all, you know, I just shouldn't have it in the ordinance.
Correct.
So
So
what
I can,
what I like, Bob, is if they have to report it to the zoning office, we're gonna be perfectly fine without having to come back to a
Yeah.
zoning hearing as long as it's there. But we've got it built in that we have a third-party engineer that's going to oversee any major changes as it is. So allow them to make changes, subtle changes, and maybe moving the turbine from this wall to that wall is what we're talking about, or it may be this, that's probably a lot of the big areas or where the roads are at.
Yeah,
And the engineer in combination with our zoning office and the developer can decide whether or not it has to go back before the ZBA. Can we come up with something along, you guys?
I'm for that. I would,
I like what they're saying they're gonna do, that doesn't mean much person. We
correct.
need to have that in our.
And I will comment, I mean, there will be an administrative review prior to the issuance of the building permit. So there is still a chance.
Okay. Amber Miller, permitting specialist, National Grid Renewables. Just for my own edification. So are we talking about permitting the parcel as opposed to the specific location for the wind towers? Because that's typically how a lot of ordinances work. Are you talking about permitting the specific location? Because if you permit the parcel, you can move the wind tower on that parcel as long as it meets all the requisite requirements. And then you have that way, if, for instance, a farmer says, I don't want you to have the access road here because that screws up how I'm planting these rows. You need to move it over here. And I'm like, well, if we move it over here, then we need to move this tower 300 feet because of this, that, or the other thing. So we have that parcel to sort of play with as we're working out, you know, whatever it is with the actual landowner. So, and those things actually come up all the time. So we have the parcel that's permitted. We look at everything on that parcel with wetlands, wildlife, cultural, all those things. The actual parcel is permitted. And then if the location on that parcel changes, we bring in a new, you know, site plan for that particular parcel for the zoning officer.
I would agree with what Amber is saying. I think that comes down to the comfort level of the board as to whether they are okay with the zoning office making that determination following a hearing.
I'm perfectly fine with it, especially with the combination of a third-party engineer that's in place. Like, we
Yeah.
have our protection there.
I am too. I'd be all right with that.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time they want to make a change. We want them to be able to move these projects forward at a financially feasible.
Yeah, and there's a reason they want to move, or the landlord wants it moved, or the farmer farming practices. So, I mean,
And once again, we know enough of the landlords or whatever, maybe it's something as simple as, hey, we just want to confirm that
Yeah.
this is not just you doing it out of your own benefit, but there's gonna be, you gotta comply to the certain standards anyway. So I'm perfectly fine with implicating some of that because like I said, I hate
Yeah.
redoing the wheel.
I have to.
Marilyn, do you have an opinion or can you hear us?
I was trying to print the document off, so I missed part of the discussion. Do we currently permit the whole parcel? I thought we permitted the site.
We permit the parcels.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Yeah, I have no issue with the moving the turbine a little bit within the, moving it within the site. How large of a site are we approving?
It'd be a parcel, so it could be an 80 acres, correct? Theoretically.
Theoretically, and then once the location is established and built, the special use is only applied to the turbine itself and the access road. So
That's where I was confused. Thank you.
So I think we can accommodate that very easily. We'll just get this built in with Stephanie to allow minor changes that are approved with the zoning office and go from there, much like we did with the solar.
I mean, to Amber's point, the concept of like kind of permitting the box, if you will, and having flexibility within a particular area. The next point I have here is I think the shelf life on the SUP is 3 years, at which point we would have to have the building permits issued. I think we'd like the ability to apply for the building permits, like the submission of the application within 3 years, but I mean, there can be delays in the building permit approval process, and we don't want to get cut off because of a technicality in the timing mechanism. So submitting during the 3-year window for the SUP and potentially a mechanism as well for an extension, if approved by the group.
So we've always had it at 3 years. We have extended it. We've had multiples extend. Courtney was just part of one here 2 years ago, I'd say. So we're very open and we understand that the issues with PJM and the grid are probably the biggest issue that you guys have. We want these projects in Lee County, but it's also a way for us to say, hey, let's continue to move it forward. But we've been very receptive to developers who have showed a want and a need to develop. You're not just going and getting your special use permit
Sitting on it.
and just sitting on it. And that's, and let's be honest, like I'll just call it out what it is. That's what a lot of community solar projects did. And we never saw any development. We never saw any communication with the zoning office. And so most of those did not get extended. If you're in constant communication with the zoning office, the chairman of the board of the renewable energy, it's a very simple process of getting it. And so it's just forcing you to say, hey, we are here to play. We're just being handcuffed by somebody else. Mr. Olson.
I think this changes, we want these projects to move forward just like everybody else. But what happens is you get somebody running through and then they try to sell their project or look for an owner for the project. We don't want to do that because it affects other projects in the county. And so if you're going to go through the process, you're going to do it for 3 years or come back and tell us what the issue is.
And just to note that the standard expiration date for a special use permit is 1 year, and we have extended that to 3 years because we understand there are, challenges you guys have to get through. So, but allowing you to come in and ask for an extension is how we feel that you can get beyond that.
The county has past practice already, so I think that establishes what we do. Nelson Power Plant, we waited 10 years probably for that to come online. Is that correct?
I don't recall for sure.
Maybe pretty close to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was a
So-
while.
So I understand where you're coming from with the expiration, but just to make sure that we constantly have communication. We've been backed into a corner by other renewable energy developers. It felt like.
Because the way that the language currently reads is that the project must start construction within 36 months of the permit issuance.
What section are you
I am,
Second page here. Oh. Units.
Oh, here it is, section E. Yep, I got it.
Which section?
Section E, so you're on page 4. I can't remember. I'm sorry. What section is it? Does it say?
below the way this is reading to me, it's under community meeting, but further down.
Oh,
Above design safety certification.
oh, there it is, subsection B. Yep, within 36 months. Does everybody see it? Probably not. If you're looking at section E, number 5, number D. Letter D. Numbers are hard.
Well, I think at that point, then you run into problems to define construction. So, what is construction?
Correct. That's another question we had. Whether the definition can be assigned there.
So the point where it says the underline, it says no building permit is secured by the end of the 36 months, then the special use permit automatically becomes null and void. Would be, probably needs to be changed to the special use permit may be renewed or something along those lines. See where we're at, Alice?
Mhm.
Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would, but I would, you know, say, don't wait the 3 years. Come talk to us at 2-year interview or
Yes.
come early.
I think the intention is to submit the application for building permit within the allotted window, but should there be like delays in the issuance of the building permit, the inability to start construction would be the issue here.
Yeah, the null automatically scares me, right? Like that's where I'm at. Like, may become null and void. Could be something that's very
And we
simple
can,
as that.
and we can do that where it may become null and void if not, if an extension is not granted by the county board.
Perfect. Because right now it doesn't say that extension, how I read that.
As a company building the turbine, though, I don't like the word maybe. Yeah.
It's possible that, I mean, the county could deny that, right? Like you could have a building permit application submitted, it's still undergoing review. And it's like, you know, we don't like these guys, we're gonna kill it.
I'm gonna jump in here. I like Bob's comment, they need to be in contact with the zoning office throughout this 3-year process. Maybe once, at least at a minimum, once a year to update the zoning office where they're at in the process.
Incorporated that somewhere.
We incorporated that into the,
I think that's a yearly review or something. Don't you have that in
Yeah.
here?
that's in here as it goes, so.
Is that the operating report or is that?
Yeah.
That's after the facility's operational, correct? So, I mean, if you guys did want to, I'm not totally against the idea of a project update during the development life cycle, but like, should we meet that criteria, like the ability for us to extend having met that criteria should be the option.
But once they purchase the building permit, I mean, it's expensive. They're gonna go through with the project or they're not gonna purchase a building permit. I would think you want to tie it to that or how?
Say again.
Well, you know, define construction on this. They have to, I understand what you guys are trying to do here, but I don't know, you tie it to the building permit like it is now, or what are you comfortable with, Alice?
And I'm trying to figure out
If I may offer a suggestion, this is Courtney Kennedy. If you carved out two reporting requirements, one that's triggered once a project becomes operational and becomes an annual reporting requirement, I think that would work. But also after you get through your zoning and get through the county board, if you made it, 3 times a year that the developer has to at least call the zoning office to provide an update, that might help as well.
I don't even think it has to be 3 times a year. I could really think it just needs to be twice a year. Just, hey, here we are. We still exist. And that's all we're asking for.
Yeah, and understand of where the project stands.
Just that you still exist, that you're still a company, because we've ran into that before, right?
Yeah.
So that's I think you understand where we're coming from, that we have to protect some of these, and we're not saying that you're a fly-by-night company by any means, right? But it's the next company that's a fly-by-night company that comes in and doesn't necessarily want to work with the county. You want to work with the county, and that's why you're here today. There's a lot of companies that just tie up land, acres, leases that don't allow you guys to expand your projects. So that's what we're trying to keep out.
Yeah, I think high level project updates are within the realm of reason.
We can come up with something there. I think that's pretty easy. After the zoning communication.
And I kind of like what Miss Kennedy said about having some type of required update annually prior to the issuance of building permits. And then,
That could be simple as an email.
right,
Yeah, we don't need you to fly in from Virginia, Will. You can just send an email.
Oh, we discussed that before. We talked about 3 months, then we moved down to say just once a year.
That was for post-construction,
Okay. Well,
but something very similar to
yeah,
that.
I mean,
So,
why not duplicate? it?
right, why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
So I think we can come up with something that triggers it, doesn't automatically make it null and void if you don't get within 36 months. But we're trying to make sure that we've got constant communication of saying, you don't walk in the month of the meeting and ask for an extension. We know that the conversation's happening, and we're very receptive to that. So
He has a red line, Tom, right?
yes, Tom.
So we do have an updated version of that. That's a whole lot cleaner than what you're looking at there. That we'd be happy to provide, which should be able to provide a lot of the clarifying language. Because I would say more than half of our commentary is more just clarification on certain items that are a little ambiguous.
Yep. So we'll work on the expiration of the SUP. Setbacks looks like is your next.
Yeah, so speaking of ambiguity, primary structure is really undefined. You guys do have a few carve outs here, unattached garages, barns, storage sheds. But a lot of the setbacks are usually tied to an occupied residence in most jurisdictions. So really refining either the definition of primary structure or changing to inhabited residence, I think is what we would like to get at. Because right now it's very nebulous as to what would be considered a primary structure. We have a structure that's not a garage, barn, or hunting or storage shed on our property, and that would be subject to shadow picker restrictions, which doesn't seem appropriate. So I think we'd be happy to propose some language here back to you all for review.
That'd be fine.
I'd like to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, but insofar as the primary concern is effect on human beings living at home, we would likely tie that to an inhabited residence. I don't know, Amber, if you had any comment on that.
And then
No, I agree. Yeah, typically it is the primary structure. Typically, it's the primary structure, as opposed to, a shed or a silo or any other structure. Those are usually excluded for shadow flicker.
I don't know if I like, I'm not in this enough, but the term primary structure, what if it is a school or something like that? Is that a primary structure then?
I think we can specifically call that out because we don't want to be,
Right,
you're in mass or service on Sunday and you've got shadow flicker going
Right.
through the church. Like that is clearly not the intention.
Right, inhabitable building, then you can do that.
I guess I'm kind of confused. The definition says primary structure includes structures such as residences, commercial buildings, hospitals, and daycare facilities, but does not include hunting sheds, storage shed, pool houses, unattached garages, and barns. So I guess,
Because there may be some structures that are not called out specifically here that would potentially fall into a gray area of primary structure.
okay,
That's where we just want to be a bit more clear. And so we can refine this definition to probably get more comfortable.
and just so the board is aware, we have not had an issue with this definition previously.
Just so you guys know, that's page 2. It's under the actual definition of the primary structure. Would love to see what you come up with from a definition standpoint. We can look at working that in if you want to send over some suggested language to Alice. Our favorite topic, shadow flicker.
So shadow flicker, I guess in most jurisdictions would apply to parties that are not participating within the project. So usually it is an occupied residence of a non-participant. I mean, this clearly relates to primary structures. In addition to that, the mitigation, so I understand the 30-hour requirement, that's almost there. The mitigation between 10 and 30, I don't know how to assess that. What is really being asked there? Because if we're already at, if we meet the requirements of the 30 hours, there really shouldn't be any additional burden to reduce shadow flicker down to 10. Because I think that negates the 30-hour target.
This requirement was adopted some number of years ago, and it was simply just to provide added protection to the landowners.
Yeah, because we didn't discuss that at all in this hearing. This has been pretty standard for several years for us.
For close to, 15 years.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, I understand the 30 hours, but if I meet the 30-hour requirement, I just don't understand, like, I need to then try to reduce to 10.
Correct. Whether it's with vegetation is what it really comes down to, is because we're only talking about if it's going through a window, right? I
Correct.
don't care if it's on the side of a house. We only care if it's going through a window. So if we have the ability as a developer to help the non-participating residents, that's what we're trying to help and aid them in maybe adding vegetative, a tree, so to speak.
I mean, yes, I mean, vegetation as a whole, I've seen primarily applied towards solar development for screening. But the way that this reads, I mean, it's beyond like that inhabited residence, right? Because we're talking about shadow flicker on a primary structure, and depending on how that's defined. Like if you've got shadow flicker on, say, a warehouse that's being utilized to load something.
Right. That doesn't matter because it's.
But it matters here because the way that it's currently being structured, like depending on how that primary structure definition ends up shaking out, I mean, shadow flicker will apply to that. Like clearly the intent is residences. I think we can make that clarification because I think that's what we're trying to get out here is like people don't want to be sitting at home in the afternoon and have flicker bouncing around their living
Right, that's what we're trying to reduce, right?
room. Right.
So I think that comes back to,
I don't think it's just the primary dwelling we're trying to protect, though. What if it's a school? What if it's a,
but I think that can all be tied into what a primary dwelling could be. Or when we go to a primary structure, it's not a dwelling, it's a structure. So I think that goes back to defining what a primary structure is, and then saying that if it's 10 to 30 hours,
so I think the goal originally was to provide, you know, protection to all landowners so that no one is receiving more than 30 hours of shadow flicker per year, not just non-participating. And then the second paragraph adds further protection to the non-participating residents that are stuck within a project, giving them an additional protection. So I guess it's up to the board if we want to.
which is what we've done with solar too. We've defined vegetative buffer strips for solar as well. So it's not like we're excluding one for the other for non-participating.
The nuance there is, I mean, we're gonna deal with structures here that are, 500 plus feet in the air. Like your typical solar array, at the highest, assuming, 2 modules up in the frame, you're looking at maybe 16 feet. So the vegetation, like I can't go out and plant 100-year-old trees, right? So what that would even look like, I mean, I guess you could put trees up against a window, but I mean, the landowner is gonna want that.
We have not had an issue with this stipulation from any company prior to this. They typically work with the landowner, whether it's a cash payment, they install awnings. We stay out of that so long as the landowner agrees.
Two of the main problems we have is shadow flicker and the lights at night. And I don't know if I want to change this. I think it's good the way it is, in my opinion. I understand industry's point, but we need to work around that, I think.
And I think we're totally fine with the 30-hour concept. It's the mitigation between 10 and 30 that is ambiguous. Like if the requirement's 30,
Well, we can lower the shadow flicker to 10.
Well, and
that would be, don't do
the
that.
first paragraph, we can take out non-participating. And then it just is a blanket 30-hour for any property owner. And then the second paragraph would apply only to the non-participants. And if your report shows that a property falls between 10 and 30, then that section would apply, I guess.
Like Mr. Olson said, it's been practiced for several years now, 10, 15 years. And I don't believe this has ever even come up in conversation when it comes to permitting of a property.
And I totally understand that. It's just the air quotes remedy between 10 and 30 hours. Like, I don't want the expectation to be like, we're going to go and vegetate and put awnings on every house that has 29 hours of shadow flicker.
The reason we leave it vague is so that you guys have the ability to work it out with the landowner directly, however that may be. So, if they want vegetation, you plant vegetation. If they want a cash payment, you have the option to give them a cash payment. We're not trying to, I guess, limit what you guys can do as far as what that remedy is, but that's your responsibility. I mean, we can further define it, but I don't think it's going to go away.
That may help. And I do see my external counsel, Melissa Vankrum's on Zoom. So I'm wondering, Melissa, can you comment on this? Because I don't think we can request a waiver, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm Melissa Vankrum, and I've been assisting with review of the ordinance, and we, as Arthur said, have looked at a lot of ordinances and look at them to make sure that we can comply. And as Arthur said, I don't think the concern is with the concept of 30 hours. It's with making sure we're clear what these rules are and that we can comply. And the way it's written, there is no waiver ability. So legally, there is no ability for a cash payment to suffice in lieu of this. It says undertaking measures such as trees and or vegetation or awning installation, but the way it's written, we're supposed to mitigate down to 10 hours. So a payment doesn't change that, the way this is actually written. We could come up with some alternative language that I think would get to that point. I mean, it sounds like you've been reasonable in working with landowners and not worried about the fact that it doesn't have the specific language that it would allow that. But I think the key for us is predictability and knowing that that we are in compliance with the ordinance if we're doing those things. So, I mean, I think just a little bit of clarification in the ordinance language would be helpful there.
If you've got some ideas of what you want to do or what your suggestion would be, we love, like, started off, we love what industry can bring to the table
Could we
and helping
add,
us clarify some of this.
could we add to like a good neighbor agreement in there?
Well, what we can add is the ability for them to obtain a waiver from the property owner.
Well,
And I'm pretty sure that's typically how we have been proceeding.
That's how we've done it in the past. 'Cause
Right.
I've been involved in some of that.
Correct.
So
So
if
we
you want to
can-
come up with some language that you guys like, we'll go back and look at it with Alice and Stephanie, and we'll try to see if we can come up with something that's just more definite.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Decommissioning.
Decommissioning. I guess our proposal on decommissioning would be that the decommissioning follows roughly what's laid out in the AMA within the state of Illinois. And I think, we agree that appointing an engineer makes sense. I think the mechanism for this is we would pick from a list. And if unagreed there, then we would essentially select one each, and then that person would select the designated engineer.
So you're just concerned by the process of selecting the third party.
Yeah, in part. And
Sure.
then there's additional language there regarding actually going out and getting bids for the decommissioning itself. Is that, I think we can probably come to terms with the engineer as to like what the cost of the decommissioning would be. But going out and getting bids for a decommissioning that'll occur 20 plus years out in the future just seems imprudent.
I think that's why, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's why the decommissioning has to be updated every 5 years, correct? Because we're only trying to plan a decommissioning for every 5 years. Because trying to do something 25 years, it'd be, I'm going to use a year like this when we're at 12.5% inflation or whatever it is.
Right.
We'd have never been able to justify it. We're hopefully next year at 1% just to help my pocketbook. But
So, what we could do in this situation, instead of having them go out and get bids and whatnot, is that they submit their decommissioning cost estimate to the zoning office and our third-party engineer. And then we can have the third-party engineer determine whether it's a reasonable estimate or not. And go from there.
That probably makes more sense because we got other projects in the county, so we're gonna know what decommissioning is. I hate to see a separate engineer in every project. It's just unwanted cost for everybody involved. Is there something that we could come up with, that if we don't feel it's correct, that we have the right to get our own estimate and go from there?
because we have to protect the county.
Yeah,
That's the ultimate
That's
goal.
why we're here today. We want industry in Lee County, but we still want to protect citizens. Can we work on something like that?
Yes.
I guess maybe we can talk about a little the method of deconstruction you guys call out here. I think you guys specifically call out bringing in a specialized crane to remove the blades from the nacelle.
Yes.
can you just talk to why that was added specifically? Because it does require pretty specialized equipment.
So reverse build is what you're essentially talking about.
Yeah, versus, you know, falling a turbine is pretty standard in this business. And I understand the concern here on like if a blade were to splinter, et cetera. Go ahead.
As long as the fiberglass blades are taken down, the oils taken out, I myself have no problem with that. I just don't think we want to get in the business as a county that's directing them how to do it. But we want to do it safely.
And that's where what we just covered recently with GSG is that instead of doing the reverse build, which is the most expensive and requires the most specialized equipment and crew, we have done this compromise where we will allow them to fell the turbines so long as the blades are removed in advance. I see that as a compromise.
Yes, I don't like to see that £1,000,000 crane out there that we don't need it.
But if you, I mean, you're essentially talking about the same thing, be another avenue. If the blades are off the unit before it's fallen.
Actually, you don't need that big a crane to take the blades off that you do to take the nacelle off. So you go from a 500-ton crane, I'm talking about capacity, to a 1,000,000-ton crane capacity for the height and the reach. That's a lot easier on our tile systems and everything out in the fields. So.
In your perfect world, you'd fall the system with the blades and the.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's what we don't want to allow in the county. We're worried, we're fearful of.
We had that over in Pawpaw, and we had the fiberglass shards out in the field, and we really didn't want to see that again.
Correct.
Because our purposes of base of our comprehensive plan is to protect and can preserve agriculture. And you go and you drop a blade that shoots fiberglass everywhere, you'll never pick up every piece and you'll never
It's
protect.
non-biodegradable. It's there forever.
I understand the concerns, but that,
I mean, could we just leave it open and just have a decision made by the county at a later date as to specificity around the decommissioning plan versus it being in the condition and the special use permit? Because
So-
at the end of the day, I mean, the decommissioning plan itself will have to be approved and any methodology would be covered there.
I mean, as long as the plan includes that you're gonna take off the blades before you decommission, is that what you're
Because
asking?
there may be, let's say, 20 years from now, there's a better way to fall a complete unit. Whether it's a guide or something. Like
absolutely.
that needs to be an option versus like here, it's so codified. Like if there are developments in the future that would allow for a prudent falling of a turbine with blades intact, that should be an option.
So I've been on the board for 4 years now. We've changed this ordinance 3 times. So
Exactly. As we start seeing new things come in, the company's doing things differently, then that triggers a discussion as to, do we need to update our ordinance? So I think if it came to that point in time where we started seeing this, for one, you'd be able to ask for a variance if you were petitioning, and
really that just forces you to come back into conversation with us. Like, I'm just sitting there thinking pie in the sky, right? Like, if there's a way for an airbag to deploy that bounces it off the ground, like, who knows? It may never happen. It may happen, but Elon Musk is a crazy dude. He might come up with something. So,
well, and that's the thing. I mean,
blades could be made out of who knows what material in the future. So
I think they'd ask for a variance at that point. I think we go forward with what we got. We know what it is.
not only that, but I think, if in 20 years and they go to decommission, there is something better. I think the county would be willing to entertain that at that time if it's going to be in the best interest. Even if it's different than the ordinance, I think that's something that the board would take into consideration. So
I agree. There's issues that can be addressed at that time and apply for a variance.
If we have already changed the ordinance.
Yeah. So I would leave that part. My opinion.
Expert agency duplication. We talked a little bit about this, and I think there is some duplication here. We can start with ADLS if you want.
I mean, just aviation in general. I mean, the FAA is going to cover this through and through. There's some ambiguity in the way this is proposed regarding like what would be considered an airport, and our position would be that it should be a public use airport. Because I mean, if you're having to site around individual landing strips, I mean, that can be.
That's, I mean, we have
You have several individual,
Countless.
I know, like
restricted landing areas that are within the county. We can't just ignore those. We have crop dusters and everything else that run out of those. So
I could just think of over to the east farm,
Crescent.
Gittlesons, who have their landing strip that they're constantly in and out of just for personal and recreational use that we
right.
have to.
It's just, you know, from our perspective, like how would that even be assessed? Because the FAA will not be evaluating those for obstruction purposes.
In the past, the builders have built around them and worked around them, like Ressens and the other ones over east. They met with them and talked about, you know, where they can come and go.
Right. They've had to move them because they're right in a flight path.
Yeah.
Before, so
Move them being move the turbines.
move
out
a
of the flight path.
turbine out of a flight path because,
When they repowered, they moved them. Not after they built it, they repowered, they moved them, they were getting rid of some. But I think that goes on, you know, your planning, when you plan out your wind farm, you're gonna have to work around them. There's a lot of agricultural spraying going on with
Right.
them strips, and they're on the FFA sectional map anyhow, so in case there's emergency, they want, planes can use them to land, so we don't want to obstruct them with a turbine.
But that would fall back on us then to assess and use prudent industry practice to site turbines proximate to private airports.
Oh, they repowered. And it became a board issue where you couldn't get along with it on put through the tower. It ended up with just kind of sit down and talk to each other and resolve the description.
Yeah.
Kind of restrict when they could fly a plane. How does that work? Usually work that out. Works.
Some of them strips have been there, landing strips, for 40, 50 years, and when you start building turbines around there, you're gonna have problems, so.
We can go to ADLS. That's a hot topic, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think we have any objection to the use of ADLS as it's applicable and approved by the FAA.
So you kind of explained to me before the meeting that the FAA needs to approve an ADLS system.
For a specific site.
Okay.
And it's possible that the FAA may not sign off on the use of ADLS for a site, which would then require standard lighting.
What's
what
I mean,
instance would they not?
I mean, it's possible that they just don't feel like ALDS would be appropriate for a site based on proximate airports, et cetera, or for, you know, visual flight reference.
I think that would have to be addressed. I think we want to keep it in there where ADLS is required. And if the FAA does not deem it necessary, I think it would have to be a waiver granted by the county board if we wanted to proceed with the project. That's just my opinion.
Well, I think we would need sufficient evidence from the FAA as to why. And, you know, if FAA is not going to allow it, then our hands are tied. They would have to use a conventional lighting system. But then the question goes to, are we gonna allow them to proceed using conventional lighting when we are not wanting more flashing lights?
Because we can proceed down the path for multiple years, right? Invest a bunch of money in the development, and then FAA says, well, you guys can't use this, and then it'll be on you. Like if the FAA denies it, I mean, the project should be able to move forward at that point. It's like, it's not that we didn't try to use ALDS for this site, it's that the federal government said it's not appropriate. So you're pretty far down the path.
So like Bob said, our biggest complaint is shadow flicker and red lights. And we're trying to mitigate the amount of red lights in the county. But at the same time, we want to encourage business. I think it would just have to come down to a waiver
I don't think it would be a waiver, but I think
or variance.
we can discuss, I can discuss with Stephanie how we can work that in to where if the FAA denies the lighting system, then
We could figure something out, you think?
they could still proceed.
Wildlife.
Yeah, I think, on wildlife, we're going to consult with Illinois DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on sensitive species. I think the way that this is currently structured is that the zoning administrator would have the option to appoint their own wildlife biologist at the expense of the developer. And I'm failing to see how that would be necessary if we were fully compliant with federal and state mandates on threatened endangered species, et cetera.
This is pretty outdated language. It was put into play to make sure that the companies were providing, good experts, I guess. Typically, we get our reports from the IDNR, USFWS. We've never had an instance where the zoning administrators had to exercise that authority to hire an outside consultant. So I guess it's up to this board if we want to change it to remove that and just require the use of IDNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services.
Recommend.
Ain't broke, don't fix it. I think it still protects the county, but we haven't had to use it, and it works in benefit with good developers that are doing everything the correct way. It still gives the county some teeth to protect the residents and in this case, the wildlife.
Well, I don't disagree with the sentiment there. I will say that if this is going to remain in, there needs to be conditions precedent as to when a zoning administrator could appoint a biologist, and there has to be issues that are flagged either by Fish and Wildlife or IDNR. It can't just be a blank check where well, we think this may be an issue. If the state and the feds don't think so, it becomes almost open-ended, right, as to what could be pursued. I see Amber had her hand up.
Yeah, okay, so the question is, if I have a site in Michigan right now where I have all sorts of exciting wildlife issues. So let's say locally, you want something different than you want something different. Well, right now there are a whole list of protocols that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife want, and it's EMR. It's it's for rattlesnake. So there's a whole list of protocol that Eagle wants, which is the DNR for Michigan. So it's right now we're coordinating with both of those because they aren't always the same. Okay, so doing all those protocols. Now the local wants something different to, so we have to comply with federal and state mandates. So if you want something different, you can't really circumvent what the federal and state government already require. You can't say, well, you need to do this. We already have to do this, so we can't really do something different than what they require. So I'm trying to understand what.
But where it would be used.
Yeah, so like, I'll give you an example. Like, we can cut trees in the winter because there's bats, but we can't remove the stumps until the ground gets above a certain temperature. I'm not kidding, because the ground gets above a certain temperature, because in the winter, the snakes go underground to hibernate. So when the ground gets above a certain temperature, then you can remove the stumps. So I mean, it's this whole, there's very technical requirements when you're dealing with endangered species, or you're dealing with habitats and all this kind of stuff. Now, we can then remove the stumps, but then of course you can't have heavy equipment until after the frost conditions come off the roads. So I mean, there's all sorts of things that we already navigate. So I'm just trying to understand where the local, I mean, there's already things in place that protect all these things. So I'm trying to understand what a local wildlife person is getting involved in. We pay people a lot of money to do this, already.
So I would agree, we have no experts at the county that know anything more than what the state and federal have, but I don't want to.
I mean, that's who we're relying on, is IDNR and federal government. So
I would tie it to them. But
do we still want to allow for a third party should an issue arise from a report from IDNR or USF?
I think that to their Amber's point, that they're already being held to those standards, that if there is something that's triggered by IDNR or any of the other agencies that they have to work with, that they're going to have to correct them as it is. So
Okay, so we
Why-
want to eliminate the statement that says Lee County reserves the right to hire a third party to conduct a study at the expense of the applicant.
I don't know what the study would be, maybe to arbitrate the issue, but I think the state and federal, how do they handle it if you guys are not in compliance?
Well, so for instance, like if they think, and I'll just use Michigan again as an example, they were concerned that we were moving trees between two, like what they thought might be bat habitat. So we had to do additional studies. So before we could, do any tree removal. So they said, these might be, we don't have any proof, but these might be, bat habitat. So we had to do acoustic studies. If those studies come back, they wanted to review those. We had to hire experts. So if the acoustic studies come back, and this is for solar, not wind, then we would have to do mist netting, where we would then transponder. So basically what they do is that if you do this and this comes back A, you do this. If it comes back B, then you don't have to do something else. So they require additional studies to make sure we're not doing anything we're not supposed to. So
But are they on site, or what mechanism do they have? I guess to make sure you're in compliance.
oh yeah, they send wildlife experts out. If they're concerned about something going on, like during the time, we're required to pay for someone on site to make sure, a biologist to be on site to make sure something's not going on. So
as a county, could we tie something to the state and federal, say if you're not in compliance, then we pull the permit, or we do or we have
I think that's kind of already covered. I mean,
Right.
They have to comply with what IDNR says. If they're not in compliance with the ordinance, and their permit is at risk ultimately. So
all right, so we got a mechanism in place, we're good.
This is Sarah. If I could add one more thing in the language, it doesn't specify, adverse material negative impacts to wildlife. It just says impacts to wildlife. And then in addition, it speaks of wildlife and habitat broadly, not specifically threatened and endangered species, which is really where we would want to ensure mitigation. So if there could be clarification in the language to specify, threatened and endangered species and habitat, I think that would be
Give
beneficial.
some suggestion. Once again, if you got some suggestions for language, please forward it on because I think we're getting to where we need to be with this. It's formulating to what works for industry. You've got drainage tiles repair. Yes, it's covered in AMA. Yes, we know it's duplicated. Yes, because it's that important to Lee County. So agriculture is the lifeblood of the area. And like Mr. Olson said, he's had personal experience with tiles.
Yeah.
I know several farmers who have, so it's just trying to.
I drove back here this morning. I was like, thank God.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so yes, we completely get it. We understand that it's probably duplicate here.
It just makes us feel better it's in there.
But it makes us feel better that it's in there.
I can backtrack quickly on
Yeah.
decommissioning. I mean, I think there was some language in there. I can't find it the second. That it was assumed that the facility would be like the useful life of the facility and like when abandonment would be constituted. Like if we cannot get a gearbox for some reason because of supply chain, we don't want to be defaulted into like the end of the useful life of that piece of equipment. Driving decommissioning.
I don't anticipate it would. I think if you're in communication with the zoning office saying, we're trying to get this part, here's a letter from the company that says they're back ordered, it's going to be X amount of time. We're not going to hold that against you. It's beyond your control. It's where a turbine's been sitting out there for 3 years doing absolutely nothing and we don't know what's going on with it. And it just blades are on the ground and whatnot. So,
Have experience with that.
Yeah, we have
so,
past practice there too.
so that is what we're trying to avoid. We understand that post-COVID, that things are a little bit different with the supply chain, and we've been very willing to work with people on that.
And I guess back on decommissioning, like the ascribing of salvage value to the posting of the value of the security. Because if you post decommissioning, call it day 2 of an operational project, I mean, that salvage value is clearly tangible, right? I mean, these are brand new units. And the value of the materials themselves.
I think that's only tangible to the industry. It leaves us holding the bag if something were to happen.
So my biggest fear is that you just throw up your hands and walk away, right? And how does the county stay whole?
I think though the decommissioning is after 5 years, right? They put it up there 10 years or.
It's every 5 years it has to be real.
No. When do they have to put money up?
I think it depends on what type of method they use. If they do a letter of credit, I think it's
5 years, they put 50% down. And then-
within.
That's for the escrow, right, mechanism. I mean, there are a couple different ways that you guys have it structured within this agreement.
Yeah,
It's phased in by the AMA. So it's 10% and then 50 and then 100% at year 11.
so you're 11 years old at year 11. I understand the turbine and the cell might be worth, X amount of dollars, but we don't want to worry about that. That's not something the county does. I think we need something that works on every project, goes through. Maybe it's a Suzlon turbine that don't last 7 years, we don't know. So we've got experience on that too. So
Comes down to protecting the county.
yeah,
That was the repowered asset though, right? That was one that Pattern purchased. from Suzlon.
Sorry?
Was that the repower you guys are talking about? The old Suzlon project?
yes.
Yeah.
I think they went to South America, I think. So
I think on complaints, we just want to simplify the procedure here. I think that within the operating plan of the project, it'll be pretty clear from an administrative perspective how complaints are handled. Seems like it comes up a couple different places within the document regarding complaint submission. And we also want to caveat that the complaint should be qualified in some way, because sometimes people, they don't like when, for example, I mean, they will just bombard a call line and want responses, and we're happy to respond to legitimate complaints.
I guess who decides whether they're legitimate? The zoning office.
Yes.
Some kind of proof that like there's an issue, and not just calling the call. Because I mean, we are bandwidth constrained as well from a personnel perspective as to who's going to be monitoring a specific complaint line. And just making sure that we can respond
So
accurately.
in the past, from my experience here within the last couple of years dealing with this, is that the companies are very eager to handle complaints, any kind of complaint. They want to know if people are unhappy, and then they attempt to resolve it. I guess how specific do you guys want to be?
I like keeping it very vague, like we have it right now. Like they're gonna report a problem to the zoning office. They'll decide whether or not it's Bob's mad because he didn't get a turbine and his neighbor did. And if it's a real legitimate complaint, and that's where the communication between the zoning department and the developer every year continues to work, of saying, hey, we had this person complain that they saw one of your trucks on the road. It's not really a complaint when it's a pickup truck driving around looking at.
So, and essentially that's how, I mean, when it comes in, is this a civil matter or is this a county matter? And if it's a civil, we direct them to work with the companies directly. If it is a county matter, then we start looking at our processes.
How many frivolous complaints do you get now? You know, I think the county, we got 300 turbines in the county. I think the county residents understand wind farms.
In the last approximately year and a half, I've gotten 3 complaints, and to my knowledge, they all have been resolved. Without the county's involvement.
If I could, I think the majority of complaints come during construction. I mean, honestly, because there's just more disruption. There's a lot going on. So, maybe not that I'm promoting more paperwork for myself, but perhaps there could be like a complaint resolution plan for construction, because for the applicant, just because that's typically when you have,
So I think a complaint that comes in during the construction is gonna go to Alice. It's then gonna go to our third-party engineer to be realized if it's a complaint, and then the developer, third-party engineer are gonna be the ones who
And there's gonna be
decide whether or not you're complying based off the ordinance. right?
yeah.
I didn't hear what he said.
Sorry. I mean, at the end of this process, prior to operation, I mean, there will be a comprehensive complaint plan in place that's structured with the zoning officer, correct?
Well, but that's what we're trying to take it out of, is out of the zoning officer. We want to put it back on people who know, and that's why we have a third-party engineer that, as long as like Anthony can sit there and complain that the roads, I'm saying Anthony as the resident, not Anthony as the employee, can sit there and complain that the roads are being driven on too much. That's agreed upon in a road use agreement. It's already handled. So the complaint's already logged, looked at, you already have a job to fill that. Now, if they're saying, well, there's dust, well, dust might not be covered on a road use agreement because, well, you live on a gravel road. So it may just be a complaint because it's a frivolous complaint, and then it's nothing. It goes, as long as you're following the ordinance as it's written and your construction documents, then
I realize these companies want it black and white down in our ordinance, but a lot of the complaints I deal with, I handle them, or the chair or people handle them right away. It might be a dust issue or the trucks are on the wrong road, or, you know, I call right to the company, or, you know, I don't even like circumvent alleys anymore. And I know the people that we go to, but all in all, it's minor complaints, nothing huge that we need an engineer to look at or anything like that.
correct.
It's kind of self-policed out there, kind of, you know, if they want to be a good neighbor, then they take care of it.
And that's the thing, is complaints are accountability for them. You know, if somebody calls in with a complaint, it gives us a chance to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't see why we would need to change this section at this point, I guess.
When you've only gotten 3 complaints in a year and a half, I think the mechanism's working. So
Right.
by bringing on the third-party engineering during construction, I think will greatly reduce any
Well,
potential problems.
And that's the thing, it just depends on what the complaint is. You know, if it is something with the roads, I'm gonna be contacting Dave Anderson. If it's, you know, something else, it just depends on what the complaint is about and who we're gonna talk to try to find out what's going on. So I think we kind of need that.
No, that point's well taken. It's just like whenever, sometimes you have opposition in social media, like it just flies off the handle. And like the person that's supposed to be handling it, their voicemail box is full and can't address legitimate complaints.
Correct.
But I would say if you got something, email it to us and we'll look at it. I mean, if you got any better way to handle it, open it or whatever, definitely we'll look at it, but right now it's working.
And on the, I guess, moving on to community meeting, what we're trying to get at here is that the ordinance requires complete information, and that is somewhat ambiguous as to what would be called complete. Like there should, I'm understanding that there needs to be a certain level of detail relative to the project, but complete information is a bit nebulous. And so I think we'd probably want to structure some specificity around what entails complete information.
So we're not, the whole goal of this section is to basically get the companies out before the public well in advance of the petition, so the public has an opportunity to get familiar with the project and so they can prepare for the hearing as well if they want to participate. We leave it up to you guys as to what specifically you want to present.
That's where it's hard, where it's like complete information. And then somebody comes back and like, well, I didn't see turbine layouts during this open house meeting. Because that's just not something we typically would share at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I don't know if I like the phrase complete information either, because that could be interpreted different ways. I don't know how you'd fix that, but
Because we don't want to go into the process, have the meeting, and some people come back and say, well, no, my information was incomplete.
Why wouldn't you want to share the turbine location 45 days in advance of the hearing?
Because I mean, they're going to see it in special use permit application because things move all the time. Like
And
we may discover something and somebody's like, well, I thought I was getting this.
so, well, and then you have the people that say, what are you hiding? Why can't we see it? So I guess that's something for you to consider, is transparency and coming into the areas that you might, people might be suspicious and interpret that differently. So I understand where you're trying to protect your project design and the ability to move, but that can also be interpreted a different way by the public as well. So just for you to consider.
No, understood, but just back to like the definition of what is complete information.
And we can remove. Well, we want the most complete information they can provide, though. We want to be able to give the public.
Date information they can share at that time or whatever. And I understand they got to hold the back on what they're doing, but I don't like that complete information either. That would scare me if I was building turbines.
So are you able to show a project area?
I think like a rough boundary would make sense, but like providing like what the shadow flicker is going to look like a report like that.
No, and I think primarily what we're trying to accomplish is,
Areas,
yeah,
area,
who's
number
going to
of
be
towers,
affected?
size.
How about we change the word complete to current? What you have at that time is what you can share.
Yeah.
Doesn't imply there's anything. Doesn't-
And if you want to put something in there, Alice, put the current information on shadow flicker, tower placement. And so if they have something they could share at that time, there's.
How about current information on the project area?
I think that's fair. So, yeah.
Because we don't want
Yeah,
to micromanage it.
yeah, I realize
Right.
we're splitting words, but words are important here.
Right.
And, I think we all want the same thing here. We just got to get the right verbiage.
And to Alice's point, like being transparent, but like not tripping on some small item where somebody deems it incomplete.
What about like site plan? Like providing a site plan to the community in an informal setting?
Yeah, I mean, that gets a little tricky, right? Because like, what if we present a conceptual site plan and then we file the SUP and it differs, right? People are going to be concerned there.
But what we're trying to do is eliminate 500 people rushing in here for the ZBA hearing. If you can get rid of 90% of the complaints in the countryside by just saying, hey, this is who we are, this is where the proposal is going to go. It may change, but right now this is what it is. And now all of a sudden we've got 10% butters here rather than 100%.
It actually works to the company's advantage to put these out early and put the fire out early. Otherwise it builds and builds. And then we got a parking lot full out here waiting for the ZBA hearing. But I think we can come up with something that will be, I don't want to spend a half hour, 2 words, but we'll figure it out.
I mean, current or conceptual, back to Tom's point.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like something there.
Yeah.
I think conceptual works just because, as we discussed earlier, we're permitting the parcel and not the exact tower location. So, someone could see that and, not understand that the tower is not going to be, it could be, 4 acres or 10 acres or 12 acres away from them or something like that. So I think, conceptual works.
Yep.
Otherwise, you get people showing up with rulers, looking at the legend, and like, well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
too much my scribe over here.
And once again, we want to take any topics that you have. If you got any suggestions, please filter them to Alice of updates. So
I guess one thing, maybe Melissa, you can talk to this, but like the nuances between a waiver and an easement. I think you guys had called out for easements in this document with something that would usually be construed as a
But we
waiver.
typically dealt with waivers.
what's
Uh,
that? Go ahead.
Go ahead. From my perspective, we just love to have it if it's said or waiver, easement or waiver. It's particularly in the setback section where it specifically refers to setback easements. And the trick is just that we have other types of agreements. It definitely should be a written, some sort of a written waiver from the landowner that makes it clear. But that's it. We just would like to have that language clear that, setback easement or other waiver or setback waiver, however you want to draft it is fine.
You got that? Okay, that's pretty easy. I'm going to propose we take a little bit of a recess, a little bit of a break for 7 minutes. We'll reconvene at 10:30 if that works for everybody.
For me.
Get a little bio break. Get started again. Were you all complete? I think through all your notes anyways.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will just go back on is going to be the timing of the deliverables. Like really geared towards project specifics, like the technical schematics of an electrical design drawing. It's under the bullets under the first, the conceptual versus final submission requirements,
Oh,
and just really, because like, I mean, I think we talked about this. You know, when we submit the SUP, like some of these things just simply won't be at that final stage that you would have for a building permit. So just coming to an understanding as to at the time of the SUP, a lot of this, albeit beyond the conceptual stage, still won't be final. And just having those deliverables due prior to issuance of the building permit.
I think that's how we've always typically done it, is that as long as you're presenting a plan and as long as what you're doing fits within the plan.
Right.
Then we understand that, because there's so much stuff changing as we go through.
Yeah, because, you know, like a 36% electrical design, like at the time of SUP is just going to be 200 pages of electrical jargon.
Right.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement there. I can probably structure around that. And that's all I had. I appreciate
Well,
you guys.
Appreciate your time, and once again, bring everything together, get it to us, and we'll incorporate as much of the language as we can to benefit industry and the county and still protect the assets of everybody involved. So, Ms. Kennedy, I have your email in front of me. Want to address anything that wasn't addressed, or you want me to give it to you?
I don't think I have anything to add.
I just wanted to make sure.
One of the things that she did raise was that the drainage districts.
Oh, that's a good point.
I think that is something that we probably do need to consider. I don't know how to differentiate between active and non-active districts,
Yeah,
though.
I just want to, I can shed a little light on that. We had a solar project in Southern Illinois, and we had 3 different drainage districts in there, and none of them were active. And in order, what you have to do is then you have to like track them down and get them dissolved. And it took us about 14 months to get through that process, to get those drainage districts dissolved, because it took a long time, and yeah, it was kind of a lot.
So how do you want us to address that, and how do we decide who's inactive then?
So I see it here that it says a copy of the comprehensive drainage plan, if applicable. If there's no active drainage district, it's not applicable. And that's just communication through the zoning.
Active would be not had a meeting in the last year.
Well, but once again,
They should have an annual meeting. Every drainage district should. That's
they
active.
should have meetings.
But I know some out in our country.
But, and
I
that's,
met some of the drainage commissioners too.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing, whether they're active or not, we still run the risk of them
Yeah. Coming back on us.
impeding a project from moving forward. So I mean, we want their input. I think we need to figure out a way, though, that
I think it's no different than any other complaint. It's not, doesn't kill a project, but it doesn't necessarily rubber stamp a project either. That if they want to,
we could do like we do with the fire districts, where they are given
yeah,
the information, but that's all the company is required to do, not have their approval.
I agree with that,
Could we
because,
reach out to them by certified mail, and if they don't respond, or,
but this is the example that I use, is going down to Harmon, right?
Yeah.
And you go down to the fire department down there, is a lot different than talking to the fire department in Dixon or Amboy. it's no different than you've got some drainage districts that are very active and know what the heck's going on. You've got other ones who it's keen. So I think we can put it in there that it needs to be information provided by certified letter to them. And if they've got an issue, then we'll address it. But it shouldn't be your responsibility to go track these people down. Something along those lines. Post it. Yeah, we'll come up with something.
Yeah.
I think ones at least I'm aware of.
Yeah. Yep.
Correct.
But you will run across, small ones that haven't, I agree.
And they don't have the authority. They have the authority. They just don't have the mechanism to deny a project just because they hate it. So we'll come up with something there to change that. Anything else? You guys good there? Okay. Dave Anderson's comments.
That's pretty cut and dry. That was just overlooked.
Yep.
It mirrors what we have in the solar and in the wind. This paragraph was just omitted, so we can add that.
And then you've got Farm Bureau's definitions. Want to address them, or do you want me to address them? We've got them here in front of us, so.
Farm Bureau's comments are pretty much just changes to a couple of definitions. And then to take a look at the prohibition section. Their concern with that is the new sections A and B appear to create application requirements, but they are located in the prohibition section. We suggest that these sections could be placed under application requirements, which seems pretty feasible. So.
But we'll get those worked in for the final draft. Anything in regards to wind energy from anybody else in the room? Just wind. Going once, twice, sold. Okay. Ooh, that was fun. Moving on to solar. We have an email in front of us from Ms. Hinkle that comprises what Farm Bureau said there. Much of the same thing, AMA, applicant, landowner, and prohibitions. So I think all those things are pretty standard. They're just some definition clarifications.
And cleanup.
This is something then coming from the zoning office is this CAB system. And remember when we started this, Mr. Kitson, we talked to that developer out of Freeport who talked about the CAB system, where it interlocks panels above ground rather than below ground. And Alice and I talked last night, and she made a comment that if we require it to be buried, it gets retired in place. Like nobody's probably ever going to pull these wires up, right? But it makes it really darn easy to get rid of the wires if they're just connected between solar panels above the ground. I think you give the developer the option of doing whichever system they want, but we should not limit them to doing one system or another. I can see a lot of benefits to this system. I can see benefits to underground, but I don't think we should be limiting the developer.
In the CAB system has benefits to both sides. For us, we're not further digging up the farmland. We don't have to worry about cables being retired in place at the end of the project. For them, they're able to more easily access the wires if repair is needed. There's been concerns about how that would look and whether the wires would end up like dragging on the ground and whatnot. These wires keep their project up and running and productive. So they are going to make sure that these wires are protected and maintained. So I don't think we have to worry about things not being maintained in a neat fashion. I think this is just a more reasonable route to go and seems to be where the industry is heading.
I think a lot of the cap system where they really want to use those is in community solar projects. I'm sure the SES projects want to use it. If you want to address that at all, or not really.
Yeah, I would say just from our perspective, I think limiting to a specific technology and installation method is potentially problematic because each project comes with it different concerns and different environmental constraints that may exist. Certainly, we understand wanting to limit the what happens to the ground at the time of decommissioning, but if a certain technology is not feasible for a specific area, we understand increasing the decommissioning requirements if we were to not go with the cap system and were to instead go with a more traditional method of installation and wiring, but having to remove those wires instead of decommissioning them in place. If we elect to go with an alternative method is perfectly understandable for us when we look at returning the ground to its current condition at the end of the project life, so long as we don't go with the preferred technology that the county has. But obviously it is still a newer technology and manufacturers are getting to that point. But if there are older technologies or already purchased materials that we're using, I think it could add some complexities, but adding a more stringent requirement to decommissioning for those other systems would make more sense to us, just to, again, give multiple methods to everyone instead of just pushing for one specific technology, which could have higher material costs since it is newer and there could be fewer manufacturers of those materials.
Also, it depends on the site. Sometimes we do both types of, depending on what the ground conditions are. So, we had an area in Southern Illinois where there was tons of pattern tile. So we did above ground there. Another area of the site was no tile. So we did below ground in that section of the site. So
How deep, sorry to interrupt, how deep do you typically bury those wires in between?
usually, it usually depends on the site, but usually below the frost line.
Okay, so you would impact tile potentially.
Yeah,
Very-
you could. Yeah.
But I think we need to include, not saying that they have to go to tile or that they have to go to the CAD system, but I think we definitely want to write it in there that it's
Optional.
an option.
Why don't you make it where they have to take the wire out if they go bury it in the ground, and that'll drive them to.
Which
the
is,
CAD system.
I think that's what we want also in there, but I also don't want them running through a tile line either because they can't tie it from me to you above ground. So, because even how it's written today, it has to go underground and over to the next panel. So I think we can incorporate that in. I think industry would like to see that and benefit from that. We're getting some head nods, county board members,
Yeah. I like
head
it.
nods.
Any regulation on how long after a project is decommissioned, everything removed done, that there's still funds available for possibly needed repair? They dig out these lines and they nick a tile, nobody knows about it, and then 4 years later, you got the suckle take down. Realize there was something done there, who's liable for that? There's no definitive way to prove that it was cut or hit during that removal, but there's still that people there that have been part of that project. That company's packed up, moved out, and gone 4 years ago.
Yeah, once it's completely decommissioned, the escrow or the surety note would be released. So maybe there does need to be a period of 6 months after. But I don't know how you would address that. That would be, because now all of a sudden it's speculative too, right? Like,
You can't prove it, but there's, right where they dug and tore that line out, you got a broken tile there. So maybe just a year or something.
You're thinking what I'm thinking too.
Yeah.
So, no, we understand. We'll try to put our brains together and come up with something. I'm gonna let industry address this, but what happens if mowing is needed because of noxious weeds, scab tree growth? And I believe you guys are held to some standards.
Yeah, we have to submit a vegetation plan that defines like what kind of vegetation we plant and then what our mowing schedule is. There has to be a certain amount of mowing in order for the vegetation to, sort of take off to begin with. But we try to limit the amount of herbicide. We try to do spot treatment on any invasive species or weeds or anything like that. But once the vegetation that we plant establishes, usually 1 to 3 years is sort of your establishment phase. But the vegetation is not considered fully established until year 6 typically. So in those first 3 years is when we really have to watch for invasive species or weeds or anything like that. So that's when we would have to do the spot treatment, all that kind of stuff. And that's usually spelled out in the vegetation management plan. So we do, keep a pretty close eye on those things in the first couple of years.
And you have to adhere to noxious weeds, Illinois.
Yep.
That if you have a complaint, it's gonna come in, it's gonna go to Terry. Zinc.
Yeah.
To help work through some of that stuff, but it would go through the complaint to the zoning office and then back out to developers.
Do we want a yearly inspection with Terry Zink on these solar farms?
I don't think he's
Not a bad idea, though,
Trees.
Otherwise, how are we gonna know if there's an issue until it's a huge issue?
Landowner complaints.
landowner complaints.
I mean, typically, that's our most reliable source of information about the projects. People living in and around them are the first ones to call when they see they're not keeping up with what they're required to do.
But I'm gonna play devil's advocate, like bull thistle is a noxious weed of Illinois. How many in here can identify what bull thistle is? Like 4 people in the whole group, like, so I'm gonna pick on Keen over here and say he's driving by. He doesn't know that that's actually a noxious weed that's supposed to be controlled. So maybe there is some.
So if it's not controlled, can the county go in and control it and then build the?
I don't think they have to control it. You just need somebody to be able to identify the noxious weeds of these projects and then turn it over to them to maintain it. But I don't know what that mechanism is because I've seen bull thistle or anything that if you don't control it, it just goes crazy. So the sooner you can be on top of it, but the developers want it to be gone too. So
Well, don't the developers, they're gonna be doing inspections of the equipment.
Yeah.
Why not include that at the time? I mean, they're gonna go through and inspect their equipment on site, inspect the, if there's any type of noxious weeds or materials.
I don't hate the idea of having our, what do we call that person? What's Terry's actual title?
Noxious weed
inspector.
inspection
Noxious weed superintendent,
control officer.
control
of
officer.
the county.
I think we could come up with something for that. To be involved in maybe a yearly inspection.
We're gonna have to increase his salary then.
That'd be all right.
Yeah, definitely.
Expensive.
He gets $1,000 a year right now.
Yeah.
It's a living document. We can always
Yeah,
go back in a couple of years and say, what we're doing isn't working. We need to.
Correct.
It's not.
But to your point, it's not really established until year 6. And so you can have a, yeah, me too.
Well, I still think the issue about what Mr. Henkel brought up, Adam Henkel brought up about the damage to tiles, something that we should definitely look at. Figure out a plan on that.
Yeah, I think we'll have to put our brains together on long-term.
And we kind of have to consider too, is the landowners will be entering into most likely a private contract with the developers. So there's only so much control we have, and I kind of feel that that is something that should be covered by that private contract.
Yeah, because it's not going to be on non-participating residents where it affects the tile line. It's going to be on participating who.
Until,
Property.
so I don't know if there is, I mean, we can explore it, but I don't know if there is anything that the county can do, because it almost becomes a civil issue between the company and
I
the,
do like your idea of be included in the contract, developer and landowner. It's a lot easier to handle that way than go another route.
Anything for the good of the cause. I think we've got a lot of stuff to work through.
so I will be looking to meet with Stephanie from Chastain to go over what came out of today's meeting and make any changes that were identified. Are you looking to reconvene?
I am. I'd like to reconvene August 15th. I think we can have it done by then. If you tell me no, I'll be all right with it.
That's gonna be pushing it. I know we have a timeline though, so I guess what,
Gotta be ready by board.
well, we're gonna have to meet the 15th because we're gonna have to go through committees next week, so.
As long as industry here recaps today's meeting in an email to you, so we don't forget anything. And then that'll make our job easier to see where we go.
Is the industry able to provide us a summary of your suggestions within the next few days? Okay. Okay, if you can do that, then as soon as you can get that to me, the sooner I can get to working on that.
So let's temporarily set this for 10 o'clock. Is that what we did on the 15th?
Yes, you have admin at 9.
I have admin at 9. I have,
Let me check the
I run a
calendar.
30-minute meeting for admin, so we'll be all right.
Okay, yep, there is
I know
nothing
it's on the
else.
agenda, so.
I just want to ask a question. So the changes that we made for the wind about the wildlife specialists and stuff, is that going to be carried over to the solar?
What we are trying to do is make things consistent, so
Okay,
between the two
just
documents.
making sure. Okay, thank
We
you.
want all that stuff, we want the consistency, the decommissioning, all of it.
Okay,
It should be standard
Okay.
as we go. So we are trying to move this forward. That's why we have a meeting on the 15th now. So we can get this moratorium done so you guys can start developing. So I appreciate everybody in the industry working with us and helping us get through this. We promise it's not because we don't want the projects, and we just want to make sure it protects Lee County, the non-participating and the participating residents. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Anything else? Going once?
I
Going
move,
twice?
I move we adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Olson,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, everybody.